Self-discipline is not a mystical trait reserved for a select few. It is a biological skill that can be cultivated through deliberate training. The brain is a dynamic system capable of rewiring itself in response to experience, a concept known as neuroplasticity. When individuals consistently make choices that favor long-term outcomes over immediate gratification, they are engaging specific neural circuits that strengthen with use. Just like lifting weights strengthens muscles, the repeated use of circuits responsible for self-control reinforces their efficiency and reliability. These circuits are primarily located in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning, and impulse control. Meanwhile, the limbic system, the area more associated with emotions and instant rewards, often pulls attention toward short-term pleasures. Developing discipline, then, is about repeatedly choosing to act from the prefrontal regions over the reactive impulses generated by the limbic system. Each time a person chooses to resist a temptation, complete a difficult task, or push through discomfort, those long-term decision-making pathways are being strengthened. Over time, these micro-decisions accumulate into durable, automatic responses that make discipline feel less like resistance and more like identity. The brain becomes sculpted by what it repeatedly does, and disciplined behavior is no exception. The transformation from impulsive to disciplined behavior is built through consistent exposure to challenge, not comfort. When people expose themselves to friction, situations that require effort, delay, or restraint, they are effectively training their nervous system to become more tolerant of stress. This builds what could be called stress-resilient circuits, enabling a person to maintain clarity and control under pressure. Activities like waking up early, exercising in the cold, or resisting a habitual craving are all simple but potent ways to introduce friction. The value lies not in the activity itself, but in what it demands from the brain, the ability to override the urge to quit or indulge. Each time an individual tolerates discomfort and continues to act in alignment with their goals, they're signaling to the brain that this is the desired behavior. As the brain registers these patterns, it begins to automate them, making it easier to stay disciplined without constant struggle. This process is gradual but reliable. As circuits responsible for self-regulation become more dominant, a person's default behavior starts to align with their higher intention. What once felt like willpower eventually feels like normal behavior. Discipline is therefore less about suppressing urges and more about strengthening intentional action through repetition. The key is understanding that the brain doesn't care whether the repeated action is good or bad. It simply builds what is practiced. This is why habits, both constructive and destructive, can become automatic. The disciplined person isn't born with more control. They have simply rehearsed control more frequently. Over time, what was once difficult, such as avoiding distractions or following a schedule, becomes a well-grooved neural pathway that requires less conscious effort. This is because repeated behaviors activate and reinforce specific synapses, making the connection stronger and more efficient. Think of this like carving a path through dense forest. The more frequently it's traveled, the clearer and easier it becomes. On a neurological level, disciplined behavior is a function of consistent signaling and reinforcement within the brain. The more those circuits are used, the more readily they fire. Eventually, the disciplined response becomes automatic, requiring less mental energy and emotional resistance. Understanding this mechanism gives anyone the power to shift from chaos to control, one behavior at a time. The process doesn't require massive transformation overnight. It thrives on small, consistent efforts repeated daily. Each time a person chooses to act in alignment with their values, especially when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, They're reinforcing the neurological framework for discipline. Importantly, this also means that every choice to indulge in distraction or avoid responsibility strengthens the opposite circuitry. The brain does not pause growth, it is always adapting, either toward strength or weakness. This should not be seen as discouraging but empowering, as it means every moment is an opportunity to steer the brain in the desired direction. With intention and awareness, individuals can gradually make the disciplined choice more attractive and automatic. The shift comes from using real-life moments as training grounds, where the objective is not perfection, but incremental progress. As this rewiring process continues, behaviors that once required effort begin to feel effortless, and the identity of a disciplined person becomes reality. Another important factor is the role of internal resistance, the mental and emotional pushback that arises when discipline is challenged. This resistance is a natural part of the rewiring process, not a sign of failure. It indicates that the brain is encountering a conflict between old, familiar pathways and newer, less traveled ones. When someone feels the urge to procrastinate or give in, it's often because the older pathways associated with instant gratification are still stronger. But this is exactly when change is most possible. Choosing the disciplined response in moments of resistance is when the most powerful rewiring occurs. These are the moments that determine whether the brain is reinforcing its old defaults or building new patterns. Resisting the urge and following through, even imperfectly, sends a clear message to the nervous system about which circuits should be prioritized. Each time this happens, the resistance weakens slightly and the new pathway strengthens. Over time, resistance fades and is replaced by reliability. Sleep, focus, and nutrition all support this neurological transformation, as the brain requires rest and fuel to adapt efficiently. When someone is sleep-deprived, for example, the prefrontal cortex is less active, and impulsive behavior becomes harder to control. Similarly, high-sugar diets can lead to energy crashes that make discipline feel more difficult. So building discipline is not just about willpower. It's about creating biological conditions that support neural consistency. Regular physical movement, quality sleep, and nutrient-dense foods enhance cognitive control and support neuroplasticity. These elements don't guarantee disciplined behavior, but make it significantly easier to achieve. Just as athletes train their bodies by creating the right environment and schedule, anyone building discipline should do the same for their mind. When the body is regulated and rested, the brain has more capacity to make deliberate choices. That energy is then funneled into the circuits being reinforced, those tied to focus, clarity, and long-term action. One of the most overlooked aspects of building discipline is the emotional feedback loop the brain forms around effort. When people recognize and affirm their own efforts, even small ones, it strengthens motivation and encourages continued progress. This doesn't mean rewarding yourself with junk habits, but rather taking a moment to mentally acknowledge that discipline was exercised. That awareness reinforces the brain's dopamine system to associate satisfaction with effort, not just outcomes. Over time, this helps generate intrinsic motivation, the kind that fuels behavior from within, rather than relying on external rewards. This is a neurological loop that builds momentum. Effort leads to pride, which leads to motivation, which fuels more effort. Ignoring small wins robs the brain of that reinforcement signal, making it harder to stick to disciplined behaviors. Cultivating internal recognition then becomes a critical part of sustaining long-term change. Importantly, building discipline is not linear, it's cyclical, with plateaus, regressions, and breakthroughs. Expecting a perfect upward curve sets people up for disappointment and frustration. Instead, it's more accurate to view the journey as a spiral. Each round of effort, even with setbacks, still contributes to overall growth. Neural pathways take time to shift dominance, especially if previous habits were reinforced for years. Slipping back into old patterns isn't a failure. It's a reflection of how strong those original circuits were. But each time a disciplined response is chosen again, even after falling short, the new circuitry gains more influence. The path forward is not avoiding failure, but being consistent in returning to the practice. Over time, the cumulative effect of these efforts is a brain that prefers focus over distraction, action over avoidance, and integrity over impulse. Eventually, discipline becomes less of a task and more of a trait. The brain, shaped by thousands of micro-decisions, defaults to behaviors aligned with long-term well-being and purpose. What began as intentional effort transforms into effortless action. This shift doesn't mean challenges disappear. It means the brain becomes more efficient at handling them. Discipline becomes a way of being, not something that has to be summoned with force each day. The nervous system, repeatedly trained to prioritize growth and consistency, now automates those paths. From the outside, this may appear as natural discipline, but in reality, it's the product of long-term neurological engineering. Dopamine is often misunderstood as simply the chemical of pleasure, but in reality, it's the molecule of motivation and drive. It doesn't merely reward the brain when a goal is achieved, it propels the brain to pursue the goal in the first place. Understanding how this system works is essential to building lasting self-discipline. Most people unintentionally misuse dopamine by constantly seeking quick hits from social media, junk food, or passive entertainment. These instant gratifications flood the system with dopamine without requiring effort, making the brain crave more of the same. Over time, this reduces motivation for more meaningful but effortful tasks, as the brain becomes conditioned to expect rewards without work. This creates a cycle where discipline feels harder, attention is scattered, and long-term goals are ignored. To build discipline, one must learn to delay dopamine spikes and train the brain to associate effort, not just success, with reward. This intentional delay strengthens the brain's ability to stay focused, resist distraction, and engage with challenging tasks. Training the dopamine system begins with one powerful principle: resist rewarding yourself too early. When a reward is given too soon or too often, the brain starts to expect pleasure with minimal effort. This leads to the devaluation of meaningful progress and builds intolerance for discomfort. Instead, when individuals complete a difficult task and delay the reward, even for a short while, they send a signal to the brain that effort itself is valuable. This reshapes the motivation circuitry by pairing action with purpose, not just payoff. For example, completing a workout and waiting an hour before indulging in a treat helps the brain register that the reward came as a result of discipline. The same applies to studying, completing work tasks, or breaking a bad habit. Over time, the brain begins to crave the effort phase because it knows reward is coming, just not immediately. This makes delayed gratification a skill and builds long-lasting motivation rooted in persistence rather than impulse. The more often this cycle is repeated, the more the nervous system shifts its baseline for reward. This process, known as dopamine scheduling, allows the brain to reset its baseline sensitivity to pleasure. If dopamine is constantly elevated through low-effort activities, the receptors become less responsive, and it takes more stimulation to feel satisfied. This is why people who binge on fast gratification often feel numb or unmotivated later on. By creating intentional spacing between effort and reward, dopamine sensitivity can be restored and rebalanced. In practical terms, this means eliminating or delaying the things that create spikes without value: doom scrolling, compulsive snacking, or mindless entertainment. In their place, one can insert periods of focused effort, where the brain learns to operate without needing instant payoff. This strengthens the mental muscles of attention and perseverance, both of which are crucial for self-discipline. After repeated practice, even the act of working hard becomes rewarding, not just the result. This is the neurological foundation of sustainable progress, and it transforms how one relates to challenges over time. Another important aspect is creating contrast by occasionally removing rewards entirely. When the brain has constant access to pleasurable stimuli, its baseline for what is satisfying rises unnaturally high. The result is that simple, productive activities, like reading, walking, or focused work, no longer feel engaging. But when rewards are temporarily removed through intentional resets, even small achievements regain their power. This is why practices like dopamine detoxes, where artificial stimulation is reduced, can be incredibly effective. They help the brain regain sensitivity and make natural effort feel fulfilling again. During these resets, the nervous system is not being deprived, it is being recalibrated. As the reward threshold returns to a balanced level, ordinary tasks feel more enjoyable and motivation increases naturally. This contrast-based strategy is not about punishment. It's about giving the brain time to clear the noise and remember how to derive pleasure from progress. With time, this reset can reignite a deeper form of discipline that does not rely on hacks or hype. Self-discipline thrives in environments that limit artificial stimulation and increase intentional effort. Creating boundaries around technology, food, and entertainment is not about restriction, but about control. When someone limits phone usage or sets fixed times for social media, they're preventing unearned dopamine from hijacking their motivation. Similarly, reducing sugary snacks or mindless binge watching cuts down on passive pleasure that interferes with deeper focus. These limits allow the brain to operate within a healthier range of stimulation where reward is earned, not stolen. At first, this may feel dull or frustrating, but it is actually a signal that the brain is recalibrating. The desire to escape discomfort is part of the process, and enduring that discomfort strengthens neural circuits associated with discipline. With repetition, the brain adapts to these new patterns, and the craving for artificial rewards decreases. What replaces it is a sense of calm, clarity, and control. Critical elements for building long-term discipline in any area of life. One of the most effective tools to regulate dopamine is pairing it with effort in predictable, structured ways. This could be something as simple as setting a routine where work always comes before reward, studying before watching a show, exercising before eating a favorite meal, or completing a project before scrolling social media. The structure matters because the brain responds well to predictable patterns. When rewards are tied to effort and come at consistent intervals, the nervous system learns that it can expect pleasure after performance. This creates a feedback loop where effort feels purposeful and the mind stays motivated to engage. Over time, the cycle becomes so ingrained that it no longer requires force or constant reminders. What was once a choice becomes a habit, and what was once difficult becomes natural. This process doesn't happen overnight, but with daily repetition, it transforms the foundation of motivation from impulse-driven to intention-driven. Another powerful method to enhance disciplined behavior through dopamine is using visualization and anticipation. The brain doesn't only respond to what is happening now, it also responds to what it expects will happen. When someone vividly imagines the satisfaction of completing a goal or the relief of staying on track, the dopamine system begins to activate even before the task is started. This anticipation creates a drive to act and makes the effort feel meaningful. It also allows individuals to generate motivation from within without needing constant external incentives. Visualization becomes a form of rehearsal where the brain starts linking effort to expected pleasure, strengthening the desire to follow through. This kind of mental priming is not just positive thinking. It is a biologically sound way to influence motivation. With practice, this anticipatory drive becomes another internal tool to stay disciplined, even when circumstances are less than ideal. It's also essential to understand that dopamine is not infinite and must be managed wisely throughout the day. Starting the morning with a flood of stimulation, phone notifications, sugary breakfasts, chaotic multitasking, spends a large portion of dopamine reserves early on. This leaves the brain depleted and less responsive later, when deeper tasks require attention and focus. In contrast, a calm, structured morning that builds momentum through small wins allows dopamine to rise gradually and sustainably. Simple activities like hydration, movement, and intentional planning preserve the brain's ability to engage with complex tasks later in the day. This pacing is especially important for people trying to build new habits or break old ones, as it protects the mental energy needed to resist temptations. Once this rhythm is respected, the brain begins to operate with more consistency and resilience, which makes disciplined behavior far more accessible. A well-managed dopamine rhythm becomes the fuel source for an entire day of intentional living. Ultimately, the disciplined person is not someone who constantly fights against desire. They are someone who has learned to guide desire toward effort. By managing how and when dopamine is released, they create a life where motivation is aligned with goals instead of distractions. This does not require superhuman willpower. It requires understanding the basic rules of neurochemistry and using them to one's advantage. When dopamine is treated as a tool rather than a temptation, it becomes a powerful ally in building structure, consistency, and clarity. The ability to delay gratification, structure rewards, and stay focused isn't just mental toughness, it's neural efficiency. It's a system that anyone can cultivate, provided they are willing to be intentional about how pleasure is pursued. In the end, mastering motivation through dopamine is one of the most transformative ways to build lasting self-discipline. She sat watching the world go by. Something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Yourself. Discipline is often misunderstood as something internal, a sheer force of will that exists entirely in the mind. While mental strength is a crucial component, the environment in which a person operates plays a far greater role than most people realize. The brain is not separate from its surroundings. It responds constantly to external cues, triggers, and patterns. These environmental signals can either enhance discipline or sabotage it, depending on how they are arranged. A cluttered, noisy, or chaotic space leads to scattered attention, which makes focus and follow-through extremely difficult. In contrast, an environment that is calm, structured, and intentionally organized reduces the brain's need to battle distractions. Discipline becomes far more achievable, not because the person changed, but because the world around them supported that change. By consciously shaping what's seen, heard, and felt throughout the day, one can build discipline almost effortlessly. Environment is not neutral, it's a partner in either progress or procrastination. One of the simplest yet most powerful shifts involves visual cues. The human brain is deeply reactive to what it sees, and items in plain sight often dictate behavior more than internal goals do. For example, if a phone is placed on a desk while trying to focus, it silently invites attention with every glance. Just seeing the device can trigger an automatic behavioral loop. Check messages, scroll briefly, lose track of time. On the other hand, placing only a notebook and pen in view signals a different kind of task. Similarly, if junk food is visible in the kitchen, the likelihood of impulsive eating increases dramatically. But if healthy food is prepared and left in view, it becomes the default choice. These small adjustments might seem minor, but they create an architecture that either enables discipline or undermines it. By intentionally curating visual input, individuals can reduce the mental effort needed to make good decisions. Over time, this environment becomes a silent coach, guiding behavior without words. Another overlooked environmental factor is noise. Constant noise, whether from music, TV, conversation, or urban chaos, can overwhelm the brain's executive functions, making it harder to concentrate and easier to give in to distractions. Silence or low-level ambient sounds, on the other hand, can enhance cognitive control. The brain works best when it isn't overstimulated, and this is especially true when trying to build discipline. Creating a quiet workspace, Using noise-canceling headphones or limiting background media can significantly improve the ability to stick with difficult tasks. Even the time of day matters. Early mornings often offer more natural silence and fewer interruptions, making them ideal for disciplined behavior. When the soundscape supports focus, the mind stops needing to resist as many interruptions. Energy that would have been spent fighting distractions is now available for the task at hand. The nervous system begins to associate this kind of environment with productivity, and habits start to form more naturally. Light is another environmental element that shapes discipline, though it's rarely discussed. Exposure to natural light in the morning helps set the internal biological clock, or circadian rhythm, which regulates energy levels and focus. A disrupted light cycle, such as being in dark rooms all day or bright artificial light at night, can lead to fatigue, low motivation, and decreased mental clarity. In a well-lit space, with exposure to sunlight, the brain receives strong cues that it's time to be alert and active. This improves mood, energy, and attention span, which are all essential for maintaining disciplined behavior. Even something as simple as working near a window or stepping outside briefly during the day can make a noticeable difference. On the other hand, dim lighting during work hours can send conflicting signals to the body, promoting sleepiness and low engagement. Light is information to the brain, and that information helps determine whether it's time to act or rest. Discipline thrives in environments that communicate the right signals at the right time. The people in a person's environment are perhaps the most influential factor of all. Social surroundings are filled with unspoken expectations, habits, and emotional feedback loops. Being around people who are focused, disciplined, and forward-thinking encourages similar behavior almost unconsciously. This is because the brain is wired for mirroring, observing and subtly adopting the behaviors of those nearby. It works in both directions. If others around are lazy, distracted, or impulsive, those traits become easier to adopt as well. This is why choosing one's environment often means choosing one's peer group. Working or spending time around people who are striving for excellence provides daily proof that discipline is normal and achievable. The conversations are different, the habits are different, and the emotional energy reinforces growth. Simply being in proximity to others with high standards can elevate personal performance without added strain. It's not imitation, it's neural resonance, and it's one of the fastest ways to upgrade discipline without added force. Digital environments also need to be managed if discipline is to be sustained. Phones, tablets, laptops, and TVs all come with infinite sources of distraction, but also with potential for intentional use. Managing notifications, arranging home screens to minimize temptation, and using apps that promote focus are all environmental adjustments. Turning a smartphone into a tool rather than a toy requires a few intentional changes. Removing social media apps, setting screen time limits, or using grayscale modes can reduce the appeal of compulsive use. Similarly, setting up digital workspaces to minimize tabs, simplify files, and prioritize goals makes it easier to engage deeply. When the digital environment is curated to support focused work, fewer decisions need to be made in the moment. Decision fatigue decreases and mental energy is conserved for tasks that matter. What results is a cleaner, more intentional interaction with technology, one that supports discipline instead of eroding it. Even the layout of physical space contributes to behavioral patterns. The way a room is organized can either invite distraction or promote flow. A desk facing a wall may help reduce visual distractions, while one facing a busy room may invite constant redirection of attention. Clutter creates cognitive noise. When items are scattered, the brain treats them as unresolved tasks, draining attention. A minimal, tidy space communicates clarity and order, which reinforces a mindset of control and readiness. This doesn't require perfection or expensive redesigns. It simply requires intention. Every item in view should serve a purpose, either by aiding focus or bringing calm. Over time, the environment starts to act as a silent accountability system, nudging the mind back into discipline when it wanders. Physical space becomes a mirror for mental space, and maintaining one supports the other. Habits themselves are environmental patterns. Where things are placed, when they are done, and how they are initiated are all part of an invisible structure that guides behavior. Anchoring habits to specific environmental triggers, such as brewing coffee before journaling or lighting a candle before starting work, creates automatic routines. The brain begins to associate certain cues with specific actions, and this removes the need for motivation or debate. When something becomes part of the environment, it also becomes part of the routine. This is why people who build powerful habits often start by designing their surroundings with care. It is easier to be consistent when the environment expects you to be. One action flows into the next because everything is in its place and ready to support the next step. In this way, discipline becomes less about self-persuasion and more about environmental alignment. Maintaining a disciplined lifestyle also means recognizing the need for renewal. Restorative spaces, such as places designated for calm, reflection, or recovery, are equally important. A life of constant effort without built-in recovery leads to burnout, which eventually destroys discipline altogether. Creating separate environments for work and rest allows the brain to switch gears and reset when needed. This can be as simple as having a reading chair, a dedicated workout area, or even a corner for meditation or deep breathing. These spaces send clear signals to the brain that it's time to shift modes. They provide a boundary that helps protect both energy and attention. When restoration is part of the environmental design, discipline becomes sustainable. It stops being a sprint and becomes a long-term rhythm of focused action and meaningful rest. In the end, the disciplined life is not just about internal strength. It's about intelligent design. The spaces we inhabit, the tools we use, the people we interact with, and the signals we receive all shape the way our brain responds. The external world becomes an extension of the mind, either supporting growth or dragging it into fragmentation. By consciously engineering environments that align with our highest goals, we make discipline easier, more natural, and far more consistent. It is not always the stronger person who succeeds. It is often the person who designs their life with clarity, purpose, and structure. When the environment reflects the values we seek to live by, the mind falls into harmony, and discipline becomes less of a battle and more of a way of being. As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving.